I'm very happy to hand over and to have the best moderator for this session, Dorothy Gordon, WSA expert in Ghana, but also on the WSA board of directors since many years, a jury member, and there could be no better moderator for this session. Dorothy, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Nora. And as always, it's such a pleasure to join a WSA event. I find they energize me and they give me hope for the future. And hope for the future is something that has been difficult to hold on to in this very difficult time. Everybody has been concerned about whether jobs will ever come back, whether we will know trade as it has been. And in some way, they have been looking at with envy at people who work on digital, because they feel that rapid digitization has given those people a lot of opportunities. But the real issue for me is that we are seeing more and more a blurring. There's no digital sector. Every sector is digital. And so I'm really happy to have with me today a wonderful panel of people who have been working on this, in this area, since the beginning of the pandemic, and to learn from them whether it really made a difference to their business models and what they see for the future. And I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give their own introduction very briefly and explain what their application or their network does. And from there, I would really like to learn from them what changed. Did COVID-19 change anything for them at all? What opportunities did it give, and what opportunities did it close up? So I'll now invite my first panelist, Mathis, to take the floor. Mathis.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning into this session. I'm the first to start, and actually I'm the one who hasn't got a business model, because we don't sell stuff technically. We are EIT Health. EIT Health is a knowledge and innovation community co-founded by the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. And what we do is we deliver solutions for high-performance healthcare systems, healthier citizens, and a sustainable health economy in Europe. So that sounds all very nice. What we do in our day-to-day activities, at least the team I work for, it's the Accelerator team. We support startups from biotechnology, medical technology, and of course digital health across Europe to overcome the gap that exists between the research that is done in our universities and the hurdle that is entering the market. So of course the pandemic faced us or presented us with a large challenge, how to react quickly to the changing situation. And looking back at the spring, we can say that we managed to support the startups quite well. And in an ideal world, we would have been joined by a co-panelist who was actually the recipient of one of our supporting programs of our rapid reaction activities over the spring. So for us, the pandemic showed that it is possible to work much quicker and much faster than when called upon, and still being able to deliver the high quality of work we usually do.
So Mathis, tell us one of the things that you did quicker. What did you do quicker?
Well, usually we support startups with a number of programs. One of those programs is the Head Start program, where we equip startups with 50,000 euros of cash, and we run this in two separate calls throughout the year, and one is set up in spring and one is set up in autumn, and they take place in very well-established formats. And all of a sudden we were faced with startups whose source of fundings have dried up, and we managed to set up a new call to support especially digital health startups who were all about managing and containing the effects of the crisis.
Really interesting. And I think that will resonate with you, Laura. Laura, you have the floor now.
Thank you. I'm also really happy to be here. Same as Mathis, I'm also not an entrepreneur myself, but I work as my name is Laura, and I'm the managing director of the Austrian Angel Investors Association. And what we basically do is we connect angel investors, we educate them, and we also connect angel investors with startups. And we represent the interest in political manners. So we try to push framework conditions for both startups and investors, which was also really important this year, especially. What changed for us was that we also had to go digital. We were really based on physical events because what we believe in, you really need a good network, you need good pool of co-investors to make good investments and also to support your startups as best as possible. And yeah, we were focused on physical events to connect and also to connect startup with investors, which worked really well in the past. And I think it's still one of the best way doing it. But yeah, this year was kind of a challenge converting the same thing online. But yeah, our members were still supporting us. And yeah, I think it worked out really well. And also in the future, I think we focus on a mix of physical and also online events. But today, I think I want to cover more the side of angel investors and especially what changed for them and also maybe what startups can expect in the future. I think, first of all, what changed that especially big investors with huge portfolios focused highly on their portfolios, which meant they couldn't invest in any new ventures. And I saw this a lot, that especially new startups it was more difficult to get funding than startups who already got investors in. And I think also investors had to make some critical decision which startups they want to support and which, they couldn't support all of them. So I think that was quite tough in the beginning. And there was also a lot of insecurity around because, in March, I think it was quite hard to tell anything, basically. And we just tried to calm down and were quite successful in Austria because there was a program where the investment got doubled by the government. And so I think we had a lot of investments this year. I think it was really good year for the Austrian startup scene in terms of investment size. So that was quite exciting to see. And I think also investors really valued their co-investors and really seeked out to find a good match with startups. I think that got even more important, that there's really a match of financial power, a match of within the group of investors. So
Laura, are you saying that it is the funds that came from government that gave other private investors more confidence in investing, or you think they were already still committed to startups? Because you were saying that it was more difficult for new startups to find people to invest. And did it depend also on the sector? Is it a question of if you were in a health startup, everybody was excited to see you, but if you were in a startup that was helping the construction industry, nobody wanted to hear about it?
Yeah, I think first of all, the insecurity was really around all sectors because also, for example, health startups, it was quite unclear in the beginning or like in March if they could do B2B sales with hospitals and so on because they were like fully occupied by their other duties. So, and then what the health program did, for example, if a startup was raising 200K, the investor just had to commit 100K and maybe could split with 2 or 3 investors. So the investment size was way lower, and I think that really made a difference. Or also, if they had invested the same sum which they thought before, the startup would have just had more liquidity, which also was a huge advantage. I think it just gave a security, and it was a real incentive to invest, which was really important.
So listening to you, I'm sure that many people will say, there's more money. I didn't even know that. a completely different environment. I'm not sure how much extra money government gave to startups, but can you tell us a little bit more about your experience?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dorothy. I think I have 3 minutes and I'd like to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it, Amir. We can see it.
Awesome. So let me kick in. Thank you so much for tuning in. And basically, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what I've been working on the past 7 months. It has been crazy. So let me, first of all, I'm a technologist. I build stuff and I break them. And usually I like to do that with technology. I'm based in Paris. And basically the way I see it is just that throughout the pandemic and every stage of the pandemic, something was going on. So let me start back by when it all started, 11th of March, 2020 for me here in France, when the WHO announced COVID-19 as a global pandemic. So pretty much next day, we were working on a dashboard that provides interactive mapping to visualize and understand the spread of COVID-19. And it was really the early days, so that's the second day after it was announced as a pandemic, before every major corporation started a dashboard and before people got desensitized from numbers. But basically, we were trying to give people at that time, in the very first week, many ways to understand and interact with a pandemic and understand how it's impacting and how it's propagating. We put it online. We got some good attention, and it was useful. It went a bit crazy in certain areas, in certain countries like Argentina and India. And that leads us to the second stage, which is confinement. And on March 17th, here in Paris, we started a long lockdown. And that was good news and bad news. Good news for really certain industries like the musical instrument industry. Sales were skyrocketing and many people used the time to learn an instrument or two. And I was one of those people, actually guilty. And at the beginning, it was pretty much harmless. I just played my ukulele a little bit more. And then by day 20, I had a mini piano. And then by the end of the first month, I started my solo virtual band. And then it got a little bit crazy, more harmonica, bigger piano, and a lot of music theory. And something that really struck me while I was in this focus about music theory is that every song has a key. And it's a very valuable musical skill to be able to identify the key of a song. And before I knew it, I was building this game to become really my personal trainer. And it gives you a snapshot, 30 seconds of a song randomly from Spotify and ask you to guess what kind of key, and you learn something along the way. I also put it online and received some great feedback on that. And that kind of leads us to, well, you can also try it. I'd be happy to receive some feedback on that. But that leads us to the third stage, which is post-confinement. And with post-confinement, looking at how the pandemic has changed priorities of organization and the way we consumers consume news, we tapped into a certain opportunity in that domain, and we wanted to help basically news publishers to manage, to actually get into the mobile scene, since the digitization is now a priority. Everybody wants to get on a mobile, but it's extremely difficult and very expensive. So we started this startup called Press Native as a SaaS platform that enables digital publishers to launch and manage mobile apps for their brands on iPhone. So if you're running WordPress and you want to have a mobile app, that would be something that we can help you with. We launched 2 days ago on Product Hunt. We are amongst the top 10 products for the day. We raised a small seed and signed a few contracts, and currently working with more and more publishers. That was pretty much a quick 2-minute summary of what I've been working on.
You know, there's a word that they use a lot during the pandemic, pivots.
Yeah.
And I hate that word, but I must say what you just described is just you adapting, constantly adapting to what's been happening. Let me, and we'll talk about that more later. George, let's hear from you in the UK.
Thanks, Dorothy. Hi, everyone. I'm George. I'm from MedShr. We have an app and a platform that allows doctors to share and discuss cases and images and also learn from each other. So when the pandemic hit, we saw an uptick in the use on MedShr because doctors obviously weren't able to meet face-to-face at conferences and other learning events. So I guess, first off, we saw that technology was going to be used more in healthcare. So I guess we were fortunate that we had a platform, we had an app, we actually had about 1 million members on MedShr already. We saw continued growth over the last 9 months, so that was positive. In terms of the challenges we faced, there were instant cuts to lots of funding from pharmaceutical companies, but also medical device companies. So we had to quickly adapt our offering to make sure it addressed their needs. Lots of their sales reps weren't able to get in touch with, speak to doctors. So we had to provide new product offerings for our clients. So that was kind of the first thing we did to respond to the crisis. The other thing we did is we realized that COVID-19 was going to be global and that it was probably going to hit those with lower access to healthcare and lower access to resources harder. So we quickly pulled together a program to support doctors across Africa and also the Middle East. So we used our education fellows in Europe, but also in Africa and the Middle East to support doctors with responding to the crisis. So we ran an educational program to these doctors, and we were able to get funding from the Austrian Development Authority, but also Novartis Global Health. So we responded to the instant need and ultimately were able to get funding and then actually make an impact. We developed educational case series on our platform. We've produced over 100 bits of content to date, and we've reached just over 300,000 verified healthcare professionals. And we've now are building communities across Africa and the Middle East around COVID-19, but also some broader disease areas. So I guess those were some of the challenges that we had and how we looked to overcome them.
So George, overall, would you say that your business is healthier today than it was before COVID, or what's your assessment?
So I think initially we saw a downtick in the business, and probably now I think we're one of the fortunate companies by being digital that has probably grown through the pandemic. I think in 2 or 3 years we'll see if people move away from digital and back to face-to-face. So I think things are positive for us at the moment, but actually in 2 years' time, will people move back to doing more face-to-face and away from digital technology? So I guess that's my main fear or concern.
Okay, so you're concerned perhaps about the privacy and trust issues that are coming up that could hold people back in future. Let me move. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think the privacy and trust issues are very important, and that's something we focused on at MedShr. To me, it's more the fact that people do like face-to-face events. So actually, it's how much does move back to normal with a vaccine or as the economy recovers.
Human beings are social, and that's a great entree for Saba. Saba, let's hear your experience from a very different geography. And a very different kind of offering. We've heard from investors, we've heard from entrepreneurs and, big platform kind of situations. You're a social entrepreneur. How did COVID change your life?
Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, WSA, for having me on this particular call. So for me, I'm going to track back to 2019 at a time when I had won an award for our chatbot that was using artificial intelligence to educate girls on menstrual education, sex education in particular. And that year for us was a huge high, and we had raised funding, we had won prizes, awards. So as an entrepreneur, I was thinking that 2020 is going to be killer for us, and we're going to really now scale our impact, go from our pilots and our testing to different countries, different regions within Pakistan. And so when schools closed down in late February in Pakistan, we were one of the first countries to have a complete shutdown. And by March, there was absolutely nothing open in Pakistan. And we had spent, like my small team and I had spent about a year building these relationships with urban slum schools who don't have the funding, and they rely on various sources to continue creating opportunities for girls in terms of their education. And when this happened, many of these schools were unable to, go digital. There was no way for them to ever come back in any format. And for me, it was really sad to see that, all these girls that I had interacted with, they were never attending school. They were never going to go back. As an entrepreneur, I think nobody prepares you for crisis. And this is something that I feel incubators and accelerators, they do a great job of helping you raise funding, but no one really prepares you for the mental health ups and downs that come with a huge trauma like this. And so at that time, I was really confused. I was having a hard time. We tried different approaches. And fortunately, some of these approaches really worked. So at the time, we knew that kids needed education, not only on sex education at that time. However, that wasn't a priority. So we moved our attention to COVID, because while parents knew from TV and digital sources about COVID, kids were just not educated on it at all, which made them confused and scared. And so we released our chatbot for COVID education, which was fun and engaging and digital. And we tried to target those schools that already had digital programs. These were high income household kids. However, for us, this was a way for us to continue our work, continue innovating, keep a little bit inspired. We also felt the need to continuously advocate for women who were at home in Pakistan, who were having triple responsibilities of taking care of their kids, taking care of their jobs or their households. And so we wanted to raise awareness about their needs. So we use social media to kind of talk about their rights, or talk about how men need to also be responsible at this time and see what their responsibility is. And so during this time, we got a very incredible opportunity to launch into some research. And this research was on why technology for social good does not come from countries like Pakistan, and why there's such few innovations coming out of these countries. And so, considering I've been in this field for 3 years, I had a lot to say, a lot of angst that was building up. And so I used that time positively to kind of put that into the research. And now it's available on Sifted Europe and through the BMW Foundation. So this was a really good use of our time, and we contributed in that way. Towards the end, I would say towards the end of the year right now, we are very, very excited. We saw a great new need for mental health, and we're trying to launch our new game, which is a virtual simulation where a girl is actually caught in the COVID-19 pandemic in her home, and players have to help her manage her mental health. It's a game for social good, and I'm really excited, and it gives me the same kind of passion as it did for Raaji, which was my primary product. And so I'm trying to see how I can balance the two products together and continue serving needs that are entirely different but just as important.
Oh, Saba, sounds like you had a really exciting time. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of mental health. We haven't paid enough attention to it before, but I think the pandemic has really highlighted its importance. I wanted to find out from you, though, so what were the main things you talked about when you said that in explaining why apps for social good don't come out of places like Pakistan?
Yes, so a lot of people just don't understand that they can be the part of change. Often when we grow up, we feel government or NGOs, these are the only change agents, and the responsibility sometimes does not lie with us. Sometimes because lack of monetary opportunities that come, building a social enterprise is not easy. And when you know that it'll be really hard, a lot of people stay away from stepping into this particular field. And it doesn't get easy if you are a woman, and especially if you haven't fundraised before. And also there's not enough awareness about this particular topic. So these are some of the things that we wanted to highlight. How do we build awareness about what social enterprise can do, how they can help in certain situations like COVID-19. And fortunately, many of these social enterprises, regardless how big or small, they played a huge role in Pakistan during the pandemic. Whether they were funded or not, they used their own resources, they used volunteers to make sure that wherever there was need, they played their role. And the government did not support social enterprises at the time. However, traditional startups, those that were in telemedicine, or those were in mobility, or they were in food delivery, these were the ones that got a lot of support from the government in Pakistan.
Fascinating stuff. I wonder what you think about that, Matthias, listening to Saba and comparing it to your experience in Europe. What would you say?
Well, what we can say is that the crisis has indeed accelerated the rise of startups that don't just put the doctor in a screen, but similar to what George has said, that we have seen startups coming up with solutions that want to enable the healthcare professional and to connect, for example, the stethoscope to your iPad, or really want to reach out through the screen, if I may say so, to be able to touch people both physically and psychologically. So we have seen as well.
I can't hear him. Are other people having the same problem?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it now better?
Yeah, well, it's back now.
Okay, it's back. Okay, so we have to have our teleconferencing moment. Okay, well, what I wanted to say is we have just received much more applications of people really engaging in how to use technology to bring care to people, and this can be mental care, it can be physical care. So yeah, it's really an exciting time to be supporting those digital health startups.
You mentioned George. George, what do you think about all of this? Everybody is talking about how companies have to prove their resilience. I'm going to come back to you, Laura, in a minute, because Saba also said that she doesn't see a lot of preparation for startups in terms of crisis. But I want to hear from you now, George, how you think resilience really works in this kind of crisis. And then I'll come back to you, Amir, also, because I think that, you built an app out of your resilience in a way. So I think lots of exciting things to talk about. Over to you, George.
Thanks. Just to build on the points from before around, I guess, how things are different country to country in terms of attitudes to entrepreneurship. Our experience is that in Europe, at least, we have at times a little bit more experience in terms of how do we quickly adapt and pivot, and maybe the self-confidence to build initiatives and try and take up action. And the other thing is we probably have more funding in general than some other regions. Our approach was to make sure we took advantage of that where we were able to, but actually tried to empower local organizations So part of our programs are to speak to doctors on the ground and bring them onto MedShr to allow them to be entrepreneurial in what they do. So we're a platform just like Facebook and other social media networks or professional networks. So we're providing doctors a space, for instance, to share and discuss cases and learn from each other, whether it be a group of 10 physicians or whether it be an organization of 1,000. So I think there's lots of opportunity between partnerships locally and also with global businesses or regional businesses. And then I think in terms of resilience, I think it's important to quickly establish fit with whoever you're talking to. So when we spoke with the Austrian Development Agency almost a year and a half ago, within 5 minutes, we knew there was a fit for us to do something very powerful in global health. It was then over the next 6 to 9 months establishing what that first program is. And actually, COVID-19 gave us a very specific thing to target and also gave us that urgency, which made sure we started working together. The other thing that I think is important is where you see a fit with a specific company or a specific organization, double down with them and convince them that you should partner in some way. So there might be lots of no's to get to a yes.
So if you had to pronounce on the purposeful engagement versus networking discussion, where would you go? Purposeful or?
I think purposeful and more tailored. So there's a list of 100 possible people you could contact. You might contact them all with an initial outline to explain what you do and how you see a fit. But after that, actually reviewing who you want to speak to, really telling them why and where you see the direction of travel. Because I think that just shows that intellectually you've gone further, and actually an initial coffee for 5 or 10 minutes might actually lead to a tangible outcome. And the tangible outcome might be, sorry, there's no fit because we're so busy doing something else. But at least you know.
Yeah. You know where you stand, and you know that you've got to look elsewhere. I think this is really interesting. Laura, what would you say about all of this, looking at your network of investors as well as the companies that you've been investing in? Where do you see the resilience? Where do you see the level of engagement? And I'm always fascinated when people say that they do things faster, because I always wonder, why were they doing them slower before? You know, so could we hear from you, Laura?
Yeah, I found it really interesting, especially the approach from corporates, because corporates which were already working together with startups before, I think they speed up the process and really understood the value of startups. And then I also heard corporates who were cutting costs first in their startup programs. And I'm like, why are you doing this? I mean, you need to survive not just now, but also in the future. So that was really interesting to see for me. And also I liked the point that George mentioned, that the businesses try to find partners local, which is also the case with finding investors local. I think it was really the case for Austrian investors supporting Austrian startups, and also like for example, German investors supporting more German startups. That's also something I saw. And well, I think you also mentioned preparation of startups before, and I think there had to be some changes, because really in the past, usually a pitch, especially when it got more serious, was always in person. I was working at a VC for myself as well, and yeah, that was just the way doing it. And I think it was really hard for investors to invest in somebody they never saw, especially as we're always investing in the team. And that's the same was the case with co-investors, because you're basically not just investing in the startups, you're also investing in the co-investors. And yeah, I think that really brought some changes, and which is also exciting for the future, because I think it's way more efficient for investors and also for startups to know, also as George mentioned, who is a match, because you can get way faster to your decisions, which is really positive, especially like I think investing and also finding the right investor is kind of a numbers game, and the better the match, the better outcome.
Yeah, Yeah, Saba is the only one of you who talks a little bit about women. Did you find, I mean, we are always saying how it's really difficult for women tech leaders to find money and to get interest and support. What did you find? Did you find that this changed over this period? Did it become easier for women, or it was just a status quo? How did it work?
I personally didn't see a huge improvement because, and I also feel like topics like impact investing, diversity got a step, or wasn't that important in this time because everybody was focusing on a crisis and like troubleshooting, which is quite sad. And also saw that impact investing, which was really popular in the beginning of the year. And I thought it's a huge trend for this year. There was less interest. That's just what I experienced. I don't know if it's true and if it's also shown in studies, but that's just my point of view. And yeah, I think we will really go back to it in the beginning of 2021. And I think also like women in investing, because the risk got higher, and I think angel investing got riskier. And as we all know that women are more risk averse, I think there was a huge point that I think that the share of women investors didn't really grow in 2020. But it would be interesting what you're thinking on this perspective.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last bit.
It would be really interesting what the others and you think about this perspective.
Yes. I definitely think that under crisis situations, you see that all good intentions they fly off. And often we do things that we shouldn't be doing because we are panicked and we're in crisis. But if we have very clear metrics in terms of what we are monitoring as investment funds, you know that you're very clear that you have to hit a certain target, then you work towards it. But I think in many cases, it's sort of let's see what happens kind of situation. It's really getting interesting. So Amir, could you come in and tell us a little bit about what you think about the conversation so far?
I mean, there are many angles to what we're talking about here, but speaking of resilience, I think in some ways resilience is not usually a byproduct of planning, but merely being passionate about solving a certain problem. And at least from my experience, that has always been the motive to engage and build things, just that I'm interested in solving one particular problem. And with the pandemic coming in, for me, that was just a natural evolution of what kind of problems I'm interested in solving at that point. But again, wearing my startup hat and business hat, it's a completely different conversation. A lot of startups were not ready for the pandemic because no one, of course, could see it coming. But for me, the transition hasn't been very difficult because, for instance, my entire team has been working remotely for the past 7 years. So when the lockdown came and this whole we're not seeing each other kind of hit, it was no big deal for us because we have been working entirely distributed for many years. So from that angle, I can see how resilience can become part of adopting certain techniques before they are enforced on you, because at that point this whole conversation about running companies in a distributed mode, that wasn't something a lot of companies would entertain. But when this happened, it became exclusively the main mode of operation for everybody else. So these are my 2 cents on resilience from a personal perspective and from a startup perspective.
Amir, what do you think about this whole issue of women in tech and getting left behind as a result of the pandemic? Is this real, or it's not?
I mean, I'm not very well informed on that topic from a meta perspective, so I can't speak on the trends if that has impacted. But I mean, I think it's a serious issue, and it has been addressed. I mean, in the U.S., there's a lot of conversation going on on women taking more leadership position in the tech, and whether or not this is a byproduct of structural barriers, and how that can be improved. But again, there's no local perspective that I can take. That specific.
So in your work and in your company, you don't focus on it necessarily.
I mean, there is rarity for women in tech. If you're recruiting, that is something you would run into. But still, we have women team members in our small company. And as far as I'm concerned, it's never an issue. The gender is never an issue. And all the recruitment processes do not take that into consideration, to just look whether or not you can solve the problem we're trying to solve. And basically, there's just, usually when you put a job right there, there's just more pull of men. I can't speak to the reasons for this, but this is what we see.
Yeah, interesting. I'm always happy if maybe our session will raise more awareness on this issue, that we can't just wait for it to happen. We have to, in my view, encourage this kind of thing to happen. Coming back to you, Saba, what do you think of what you've heard so far?
I still feel that some of the experiences that I have might vary considerably from other people, because I felt like any disadvantages or any problems that existed before during the COVID, I think they just intensified, or they just became more clear. So I felt like I had a chance to kind of travel towards the end of the year and saw how COVID, people were responding, even with their mental health with COVID. And I saw a completely different picture back home. Just everyone is, you can see it on the streets. You can see the increase in poverty. You can see the increase in hunger. You can see that people are just very tense. And that same, although everyone is affected, however, in other countries, it isn't as rampant. It isn't as clear as it is in at least my country. However, I don't want to just make this session about all the negative things. I also wanted to talk about some of the really positive things that I've seen within Pakistan, and some of the initiatives that our government, that I often criticize, has done. One of them is around sustainability, and how there were millions of hourly wage workers who were actually without work for months. And so the government actually employed them to plant trees. And for me, this was such a great initiative of getting people to understand why it's important to focus on this. And this was not previously focused on before. So they use the resources, or they use this incredible labor to plant trees and focus on sustainability. There are also a lot of initiatives started by transgender community to launch their businesses online. I saw how different very, very disadvantaged communities like sex workers, how they manage this particular pandemic. So for me, like in terms of research, where I saw problems and disadvantages, where I saw like a lot of stress and anxiety, I also saw hope and people emerging through this pandemic. So of course, I mean, this pandemic has made everyone learn a lot. And for me as an entrepreneur, I think this has been a very, very interesting year.
Well, we actually have a question in the chat, and it says, the pandemic has forced education to go online. Has this resulted in more investments in social education solutions? Does anyone on the panel know which country that happened in? And let me just say that this is an area that I work on, and I had planned to ask this question anyway. If you look at the huge number of children who are not in education, and actually, Saba, there's a very interesting study on what happened to children in Pakistan after the earthquake. I think that earthquake happened at the beginning of the decade. Yeah. And they found that even 2 years later, children were not able to catch up because we hadn't adapted the solutions. But today we are really talking about startups and resilience and how we adapted to COVID. So before I move on to the other panelists, do you have anything to say about this question on education? Did we see more investment in that?
We did see in a few, I've seen within Pakistan that received investment, but these were not targeting the same communities that we are trying to target. If we are targeting schools and children of a higher income, they're more likely to go digital and use those games or those services or those apps. So there have been investments there, but not for everyone. The children who went out of school, they have nothing to support them, and the entrepreneurs trying to focus on that particular community, they haven't raised as much investment or support from anywhere.
Yeah, interesting. Let's go back to you now, Matthias. Do you have any comments on that? Actually, probably it's George who would be the best. Let me go back to George, because your platform in a way is focusing on education. And then I'll come back to you, Laura and Matthias, to analyze a little bit your portfolios and see whether you're getting into education, whether you see that trend. So George, do you think that you saw more education activity on your platform, or not really relevant because your doctors are all very well educated?
Thank you. I think it's a really good question. I think the first bit to say is that I'm only thinking about educating doctors. So I'm forgetting about children, and I'm forgetting about all the other different groups who do need education through their careers and their life. It's clear there are technologies that actually don't, that technologies are borderless. So our approach that we use can apply globally to specific regions and specific countries, and we can tailor that to the needs of a specific area and based on a specific disease or issue. So I think there is more investment in educational solutions, and there's probably more focus on global or regional or scalable technologies. From our conversations with partners on the ground, they're also looking at creating more solutions that are bottom up. So building something themselves that might work for a specific issue they're facing in a hospital or a department. But I think to really get the impact and potentially the return on investment, I think global technologies, regional technologies are the key, and where they can be tailored. And the reason for that is that the cost of developing a country solution actually is probably not so different from developing a regional solution when you're thinking about technology. So I think scale is really key to technology.
Very, very interesting. So let's hear from you, Laura. Did you see more people investing in this particular area? I found what George just said really fascinating, that if you're going to build for national, you might as well build for regional. Did we see a move towards that as well under COVID?
Yeah, I think we experienced the same in Austria, especially because I saw that the edutech sector got a real boost. I think digitalization in Austrian school wasn't a big topic, especially for regional schools. And to this reason, there was a real boost. We have a well-known startup which is called Go Student, and it just raised a 13 million Series A round, which is quite high for Austrian standards. So I think edutech startups were extremely important also for the transformation to online and homeschooling, which was really a huge problem in the first part of the year. And then they had some time over the summer to adapt and to try new models. I think it's still not at the point where it could be. It also depends on the school. And what the government did, they they had some tools for businesses and also for schools, which everybody could use. So they bought licenses, which really help businesses with digitalization. So I think, I don't remember especially which tool it was. I think it was a Zoom license, which you could use for free, and also a G-Drive license. So like the basic equipment for a digital business you could get for free. And I think this was a huge boost. And then they also recognized that they might push also Austrian solution, not having American solutions licensed in Austria. And yeah, so that was really interesting.
That is actually fascinating because moving forward, we see a lot of opportunity in this area. I mean, there are certain sectors that that they are not ever going to be able to go back exactly as they were. In fact, I believe in most sectors, we're going to see more use of digital tools, even if, like George rightly said, people prefer to meet in person. But it's become clear that given the cost, the time, etc., it may make sense to meet digitally. So if we are looking to the future, it's interesting to see that you said that Austria is looking to develop technology that will support its education sector and will probably make its innovations ecosystem more dynamic even. But I think in many places in the world, we are actually seeing that there's a kind of reliance on big global platforms simply because people didn't have enough time to develop these issues, these solutions. And then we see many concerns about what happens to people's data, etc., etc. So let me now invite Mathis to come in on this thorny set of issues. Laura said she saw more investment in the education sector, more interest in supporting startups there. What did you see?
Well, in terms of education and the digitization of education in Germany, I must say that at the beginning of the year, the country was in a sorry state because digitization in Germany has been actively pushed back, especially in the education area. So, for example, my wife works in a school, and there it was for years and years and years, it was not possible to extend the Wi-Fi connection to the whole school building. So all of a sudden now, over the summer holidays, they did that because they figured they couldn't live with this situation any longer. So this comes back to the experience you mentioned. Why do those things that suddenly happened overnight? Why could they not happen before? But it's something people need to agree on, and sometimes they need a little kick up their backside to come to this agreement. So this is what this pandemic has provided us with. And you said data security and privacy are a big thing. They're even a bigger thing in Germany. And coming back to my field, the healthcare sector, we have now, I think, we are the first country in Europe to have issued a Digital Healthcare Act, where really apps are able to be prescribed by a doctor, and the statutory health insurances are then able to reimburse the app developers for patients to use their apps. So, of course, solutions in this field have grown due to this Digital Healthcare Act, which was completely it had nothing to do with the pandemic. But of course, now everyone sees the benefit of those applications. At the same time, I agree with Laura that it has been difficult to really get investors and startups together, because the experience I have made in a couple of events that digital is really difficult format to build this level of trust between investors and startups. And you said it's a numbers game. That's true, but it's also a people's game where people need to get to know each other. And I don't know if talking on the phone is a step forward in the right direction, where you can get more input from your opponent, or not opponent, your partner on the line. But we have had a number of events online where investors were to meet startups, and they were all right, but not they were not the success they could have been if people would have met in person. So yeah, we're really looking forward to going back to physical again.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm fascinated by this experience in Germany of actually having the state validate certain apps that can be used by doctors for their patients, and that money would go back to the startup company. This is exciting, and I think that it really will help stimulate your innovation ecosystem. It's the best kind of solution, locally generated solution. I'm assuming that you meant locally generated solutions, or is this payment also going to companies that are providing these apps that are not German? Can you clarify that?
Well, of course, the law only applies for applications that are used within Germany, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't exclude foreign companies. So if you come to Germany and set up your office here and offer this app to the German healthcare market, then you will be reimbursed. And just this morning, I got an email from a startup from Estonia who, yeah, I think they work in the field of telemedicine, and they looking now to relocate to Berlin in order to make use of that. So of course, this opportunity is a business opportunity for healthcare startups in Europe. It attracts startups to come to Germany. So you really see an influx of companies.
Really very, very interesting stuff. Laura, can I ask you to comment on that? Do you see that all your Austrian companies will be heading for Germany now that, they have this wonderful legislation in place?
Yeah, I think it's really, really helpful for medtech and especially for the digital health industry. And yeah, we, as our small country Austria, we're always looking to our neighbors in Germany, and it's way easier, especially we also doing work on pushing regulations like this in Austria, and this is one thing I'm quite excited of, and it's really for startups to the German market, but I think it's also not an easy market to know, especially I think it's not that easy to transform from Austria, where the insurance companies work really differently than in Germany. So yeah, I think it might be an idea, but I think it's harder than first thought.
Okay, but I think that it will be very, let's put it this way, it's a great opportunity, and thanks to WSA, there's a wonderful network. So all of you health entrepreneurs out there, I'm sure you can find somebody to support your transition to Germany. And I keep remembering what George said, if you're building national, you can build regional. It's not that much more effort to go forward. So I suspect that a lot of those companies that do get involved in the German market may be making offerings, a wider offering to the whole of Europe. It will be interesting to see how that plays out. Before I leave you, Mathis, let me go back to you for your comments on gender, because I find it fascinating that many people do not like addressing that issue. Laura already told us that in her view, there was less interest in all of these diversity and impact issues, given that people were very tense. What do you think, Mathis?
Well, I have obviously now a number of programs that we run, and where startups apply to our programs, and we then get their applications evaluated by a number of experts from the healthcare industry, and in these applications we indicate whether a company is run by a woman or not, for example. And personally, I don't think in these evaluations it makes a difference. Also, in a recent program, we had a company, a women-only run company from Berlin, that was praised from the whole jury panel for its innovativeness. And yeah, I can really see the point that you made, that like supporting women in tech and supporting not just women but diversity and also other issues in this area, that they have not been elevated to some sort of to become key business metrics, and that they have been blown away by the storm that is the pandemic. I totally agree with that. But in our field in particular, I don't think it has affected as many companies. But I also recognize the same phenomenon as Amir said, that in general, women are not as present in the tech industry as are men. So
I think the main thing I get out of what you're saying is, yes, you know that it's something you should be aware of, but it isn't a primary factor that you're tracking that carefully.
Well, we do keep track of the women we support with our programs, but we don't get as many applications from women as we do get from men. The same as with job positions, I believe. But from the applications we get, I really believe that we don't have a negative bias towards them. Rather the opposite, I would say.
Interesting. Amir, you've been listening into all of this. Are you going to head for Germany now that they have this wonderful legislation in place that could give a lot of opportunities for medical startups? What do you think of that initiative?
Sorry, I think I was muted. First of all, I'm not doing something medical at this point, so it's not going to be very relevant. But I think my mindset when it comes to building startups is that location is not really the most important factor of doing a business. And I think, as Mathis has said, that you can basically be somewhere and you can serve a certain market. You don't have to be there. For example, my customers come from different countries, and there's no like regional focus on a specific market. I mean, that could be nice and that could be good, but also it doesn't apply to all industries. But I think now location is becoming irrelevant, and it's definitely not the bottleneck to serve a certain market. It helps to be there, but also it's not the primary factor.
But you heard Laura, she was explaining that while they might have that legislation in Germany that allows doctors to, in a way, prescribe an app and people could get reimbursed through their insurance, that would mean that you have to have a very good knowledge of how insurance works in that country. There are always going to be regulatory issues that are specific to certain countries. And I was being a bit facetious when I asked you that question, because I was just wondering, yes, you're not in medical today, but when you see this opportunity there, whether you would think of moving in. But I get the impression from what you just said is that, you know, you found your niche and your focus, and that's what you're going to be concentrating on in the immediate future. So tell us a little bit about your plans for next year with your technology.
Right. So right now we are focusing on the publishing industry. We have seen...
Yeah, can you turn on your camera?
I'm sorry, it's not?
No, it's not on.
Sorry. What I was saying is that right now we are targeting the publishing industry. The gap we've been observing is that a lot of these small and independent publishers would love to have some mobile presence, but it's extremely expensive for them to actually build a mobile app or go to an agency, and it's going to drag for months. And right now, digitalization is one of the top priorities of most organizations. And whoever was not on mobile now wants to be there, and whoever was there wants to get more people, because that's basically how they're going to build whatever business model. They need people to be there, and they need to be adding some value. So we took focus on that opportunity. And we have had some assumptions, and we've been working with publishers to kind of validate those assumptions. And we found actually that it was an incredible pain point for many publishers, to the extent that they gave up on the mobile presence for now. And most of the people we talked to have had this dilemma of wanting to be mobile, but they have to push it a little bit further in their product roadmap because they can't afford it. Also, when we talk about e-commerce, so a lot of people are using websites to sell things on stores, and that's also an area where we would like to expand. So right now we're focusing on publishing, but later on we'll be also powering basically anyone who has a WordPress website that he uses to sell something. Now he can also have a mobile app. It's a specific niche, but we think we found a pain and a problem, and we're expanding from there.
It's really interesting because a lot of keystrokes and ink have been used with reference to publishing in the I don't like to say post-pandemic, or let's say post the declaration of a pandemic stage. And there's a whole discussion around disinformation and misinformation. And how do you see a solution like your platform dealing with this? Are you going to actually, you're going to curate the content in any way, or once somebody signs up with your platform, it really doesn't matter what they choose to publish?
Yeah, I mean, you're basically working with, you don't put the rules for them to publish what they do their content. We're just facilitating their presence on mobile. But the point you've raised is an interesting point on a meta level, that right now there's lots of news, and there's lots of bad news as well. But I don't think this is something from a business perspective. This is not. This is more of democratizing access to become or present on mobile, but it's not in any way, we don't own it, so we can't impose policies.
So your position is very Facebooky on this, that we're just a platform. If they choose to tell you that you should,
your proposal is just anti-business. You can't force people to they're just going to leave you and go to some other provider. It doesn't work like that in business.
Interesting. I don't know if anyone else on the panel wants to comment on this. It's one of the big issues of our time, how we manage content on platforms and how that changes behavior.
Do you think it's
let me just finish saying that for many people, the issues have been around not just a general misinformation, but specific misinformation about health issues that relate to COVID, certain medications being touted when they haven't been tested, et cetera, et cetera. So anyone can come in on this. We'll be rounding up in about 15 minutes. And so let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think the content question is really interesting. It's George from MedShr. So we've got over 1 million healthcare professionals on our app and platform. And although they're all trained, they're all qualified, there's huge variation in terms of what they say and what they do and how they care for patients. We have some responsibility to moderate their content, but we also see self-moderation between them. So So doctors correcting other doctors, sharing their views. But I think this content moderation issue is very, very hard. And I think peer moderation has a place to play for sure. Although I think when you look at Facebook and some other platforms, there's lots of groupthink. So people agree with their colleagues, their friends. So that's the slight issue with peer-to-peer moderation sometimes. But it's been interesting for us as we've shared educational cases around COVID. And some doctors who are very experienced have actually sometimes got things wrong and not known what to do. So for us, it's a very interesting topic. And there's no perfect way of doing it. I think scale is also an issue. It's very easy to moderate if there's a small number of individuals. It's very hard to moderate if you've got hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of comments and discussions.
Available in that country, the unicorns already there, or the lack of unicorns, all of these things make a difference in how easy it is to be in business in that location. So I would say that location is very, very important. I just wanted to put that in the conversation.
Well, I would agree with you, and I would disagree with you at another level. I think that this audience today is mainly European, and within Europe, there's a level of consistency in regulation that makes it very, let's say, less difficult to go for a regional approach, the way George was talking about it. But definitely for a startup based in Pakistan which would like to take advantage of the new legislation in Germany, they will face many more challenges than an Estonian company. That's true. But Saba, you are in the business of information. And you were describing what you did to get COVID information out there. And at the same time, you were saying that this is your privileged, a privileged target group, because I know that close to 450 million children in the developing world actually do not have any access to any kind of remote education. For this group of children in Pakistan, the more privileged group, they must be experiencing a lot of the disinformation and misinformation from the various well-known platforms. How do you deal with this?
So we actually didn't get a chance to deal with the disinformation. For us, it was very basic information about COVID. Of course, a lot of the prior education that they had on COVID was based on their parents educating them, and often whatever their religious background or cultural background was, so it had integrated some disinformation from those backgrounds. But we saw more consistency in what they knew before using the chatbot. They did have a little bit background to it. However, with children on the other spectrum, there was far more misinformation and no real way for us to change that or for us to tackle that. So, yeah.
Let me just ask you now, because I'll be asking everybody to give their final comments on this. Looking at resilience following this declaration of pandemic, any last message for the startups that are watching you right now?
I would say that prepare for every possible scenario and test as many assumptions as you can, because at that time you want to give up, you want to resilience is a great word, but at that time, that's not the word that you want to go to. And so I would say that look for mentors at that time. I've tried my best to provide that mentorship to anyone who needed it at that point. And I've seeked out my own mentors during that time. And sometimes what a mentor has just told me is to relax and breathe and take a break sometimes. And that's been great advice at that time as well. On other times, they've told me to, get back into doing and stop relaxing and stop breathing because things were getting better and there was an opportunity there. So I would say that just seek out mentorship, seek out friends who believe in you at that time because you need them.
Thank you. And I'm sure many of your mentors came from the WSA network. Definitely. Yeah. So let me get back to you, Matthias. I'll go through in the original lineup we had and get your last comments on any of these issues. We've been discussing a lot of interesting things: resilience, diversity, impacts, partnerships with government that can support the tech sector. And I really liked the last discussion, which I will be personally taking forward in my thinking, which is peer moderation versus groupthink. I really like that. So Matthias, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dorothy, for leading us through this panel. And thank you to my co-panelists. So it has been quite a journey, this panel, coming from my perspective, that is supporting startups in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland in the healthcare sector. So I really enjoyed touching base with that many topics. I invite everyone who is interested about applying to our programs to come to us. We can be your gateway to access the German healthcare market, especially if you're a digital health company. We're happy to help you out. And other than that, I think this year has shown us that a lot can be done when you're pushed to do it, but at the same time, it's nicer not to be pushed to do it. So a comfort zone is called a comfort zone with a reason, and it's nice every now and then to be in your comfort zone when you have the occasional chance to break out. So this is probably the
Thank you, Matthias. It was really interesting listening to your experience and looking at those opportunities that exist because of very forward-looking legislation in Germany, as well as noting that you had it seems that you maintained a level of interest from investors in getting into this field, perhaps because of the nature of the crisis. The only thing I would say is, as a female in tech, I just wish you had more money that was earmarked for women, but it will come. Laura, let's hear from you. Laura? Are you muted?
Sorry. I was on mute. Yes. Yeah, thank you, Dorothy, for moderating the panel and really getting the best out of all of us. I think it's a really broad topic, and really, everybody has a different way to deal with it, to deal with crisis, had made his learnings. What I can just recommend all entrepreneurs out there, be really prepared, especially be prepared online, and try to create a nice performance with your online pitch. I think it's not working to pitch the same way as you would do it in a physical way. Really train, and I think also videos established as a really good format for this year, like short videos of 2 to 3 minutes, introduce yourself and send this out to investors, which is more personal, and also really try to be personal also on an online level, because I think if we sit in front of our computer, we always feel like we have to act way more professional and not really being ourselves. And I think this really has to be changed. And to all investors, I can just say there are a lot of stories we will know about which great startups were made out in crisis, and I think now is also a huge opportunity. And you might also be able to invest in a startup which otherwise wouldn't be possible, because the funding route would be usually closed really, really fast. So I think there is also a lot of potential for new investors to getting into the scene and to start supporting young entrepreneurs. And in the end of the day, innovation is really, really important in every country, and we need startups. We are depending on startups to push innovation within every country. And I think in the crisis, it got really clear which roles a startup playing, and we all can do something to support them. Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, it was really interesting to also meet the other panelists and hear your perspective and your way through crisis.
Laura, I just love that idea of yours of getting some training going on how to shoot a video for a potential investor, because it's not the same thing as the old kind of pitch video, because now you won't be able to meet them. So what do you have to do differently? I think that will give a lot of food for thought. And thank you for sharing all your experience and letting people know that you're there. And that the Austrian government, it looks, is extremely active in actually boosting its innovation ecosystem. Let's move to you now, George. What would you like to say to close off?
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy. It's been great to be on the panel and listen to others and reflect on what we've done at MedShr. To me, there's been great hardship because of COVID-19, lots of challenges, but actually, I think there have been opportunities to step up in some way to support those in difficulty through the crisis, but actually also opportunity to move quickly and break things. I think things are moving quickly in the right direction, whether you think about the environment, whether you think about healthcare. So for me, I think a crisis like this actually has led us all to think very differently about our lives, what's important, but also how we change and adapt our businesses. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from me overall from the pandemic.
Say that again, George. The biggest takeaway is
that we need to think differently about how we live, what our businesses focus on, how we need to adapt quickly to change. So whether it be moving things online quickly, whether it be applying for new funding, iterating our business models, that adaptability is hopefully going to be important in the short term, but actually also in the future as other hardships come our way.
Well said. You know, as the Chinese say, the only thing that never changes is change. Is always going to happen. I'm sure I have really changed that Chinese proverb. Anyway, so over to you now, Amir. Thank you, George, for your insights. It's been really interesting getting to know all of you as over the course of the session. Amir, any last comments?
Yeah, I mean, it was great to see how everybody has been adapting through the pandemic. I'm not sure I have something very concrete to say, but for startups, take care of, if you're a founder, take care of yourself, your mental health. Entrepreneurship is hard as it is, and I think it's an obligation to take care of yourself and talk to other people and make sure that you're doing well through the pandemic. And the last thing is also borrowing it from Saba as well, is just make sure that you try to minimize your assumptions as much as you can, and validate them as much as you can, because in a lot of times you could just get attached.
The camera is not on, Amir.
I'm not sure why this is happening, but I saw it on.
Okay. Not yet, but no problem. What you were saying was really interesting about minimizing assumptions. So I just wanted them to see your face. Like, go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if you still can see me, but that's what I was just trying to end up with. You might get in love with whatever you're doing, and that might push you to not really validate it and ask the hard questions. So that's something I highly recommend.
Well, I really liked your interventions, Amir, because you talked about how you coped as an individual. Right. And then now we can see you. And now it went off again. I don't know what they're doing with your camera, but it was interesting to see how you adapted as an individual, and then how you also adjusted for your company, and then for the realities, the new needs that had come up. So as an entrepreneur, I mean, I really had to, I found what you said really fascinating.
Thank you so much.
I just have to end the session now. I want to thank everybody who signed in and participated online. And then I want to thank the panelists, because it was great getting to know you. And then to thank the organizers, the World Summit Awards and the European Youth Awards. And then let me just say that we've discussed a lot of issues here, but there was so much more that we could have talked about. It's really important that we use the event of the festival to connect to people. We were talking about purposeful connection, but I have already seen from this panel that with each one of you, I could make a very purposeful connection that would help other people that I know, if not myself directly. But I have many hats, so don't be surprised if I reach out to you as well. But please, everyone who's listening, connect as much as you can with purpose during this festival. It's a great community, not only for direct impacts on your various solutions and businesses, but also in terms of support, because it's not always that we interact with people for a particular gain. Some people we just love to meet. And it's been good meeting you all. Thank you very much. And with that, I would end the session. Thank you.
Thank you.